Good morning and happy Father's Day. And being a father myself, I know a little bit about it. I was looking for a really good dad joke, but then I thought, you've heard a lot of those. I actually like that new phrase. Some phrases come out and they pass in culture, and I'm like, I was here nor there with it. Like, talk to the hand, that was something. You're the bomb, But dad jokes, I like dad jokes. That's a good one. So that's a new class or genre of joking. Before I get started, yes, next week is Dough Day. On your table are these little invitations. Please invite people. It's interesting to me, as I was talking with Russ and Wayne, and as we were getting to know APM years ago, how the people that need financial direction the most are the ones that have the least. Because planning is so important, and if you have $1 gazillion and you waste, 1 gazillion, is that such a thing? Your budget has more wiggle room, like my stomach. But anyway, it doesn't affect you as much. But when you're on a tight budget or you're going through inflation, the good news for me is I've been through it before. And so I see what it's like. But for our younger generation, I really encourage. We're going to be setting up appointments with him early this week. There'll probably be something that shows up online where they're there? They're up? Okay, so up online, you can schedule an appointment with him now. My concern is next week when we announce it, people might fill the slots up too. So if you want to talk to him, definitely. He's going to be here Sunday afternoon, evening, Monday afternoon, evening, Tuesday afternoon, evening. And he may add a day depending upon the response. But yeah, really good stuff. So grab an invitation, invite people. It's funny, when I was pastoring and as I was growing in the pastorate, the two most important things in life that you were never taught a class on and you never talk about? How to raise your children and money. And I sit there and I go, guys, come on. What's the biggest issues we have typically in culture? How you raised your kids and money, So take advantage of that, please. As we get into this message in Ecclesiastes, man, Solomon, it's like studying a genius. It's not easy. Sometimes I really wrestle with this guy because he was just so brilliant. And truth itself in the Word of God is obviously brilliant. But layer into that, this is one of the more complex writing forms. And I sit there and I go, wow, what he did here with his study fascinates me. He attacks everything in our culture today. We just have new words for it. It's the same old thing over and over again. For him, he's talking about with God, without God. But in our culture, it's more like, oh, you're a humanist or an atheist or a hedonist or a naturalist. Those are the words we float around academia. But the truth is, it's the same conceptual idea. A nihilist, a fatalist, they all believe the same thing. There is no God. There are no answers. And so Solomon put it in the most genius way. You're either living life with God or without. You really are. And you either take him serious or you don't. And I love it because he takes the genius and he simplifies it. And that's how you know he's a genius, because he takes highly complex ideas and simplifies them. So what's interesting is I want to give you a quick flyover to where we're at, because it's a difficult little section, but it's a beautiful section once you understand it. So far, Solomon has shown us without God, life has no lasting value like smoke or breath or substance. And so throughout the first part of Solomon's writing in Ecclesiastes, he literally shows you that there's no substance, there's no value if you pursue knowledge or education without God. Even your degrees will not draw you an inch closer to heaven. There's no value in this world if you pursue pleasure and worldly wisdom without God. And he went through that and he explained it and he showed you the reasoning behind it, which is incredibly logical. If you're wanting the reason of our faith, you should read that. And then he said there's a season for everything, a time. And even in the pursuit of justice and power, without God, they become corrupted. Even our worship, even our religion, our concept of religion, if you pursue that without him, is corrupted. The pursuit of wealth, it will not bring you what you're looking for either, and it can be corrupted. None of those bring you the meaning that you long for, the meaning that you were created to have. That's the thing that kills me, is like people are chasing all these meanings that are smoke. And then I have to pick them up on the other side after they've destroyed their lives, and I go, why? Why did you wait so long to listen to a pastor? And a lot of it, I blame the church itself. My colleagues, I sit there and I go, 50% of the problems in our religion in America are in the pulpit. You guys have had way too many moral failings, way too many reasons, way too many honest arguments against it. Our church alone has helped 3 husbands restore their relationship with God after their wives ran off with pastors. This church. The corruption of the pulpit occurs as well as the corruption of the people, the integrity that we should have. So Solomon, when he says everything without God is corrupted, he's absolutely right, including the religion, the worship, the Christianity. I put that in parentheses because, some churches are just not really a church. Only in the name do you find it. But then this is cool. We get to this section now. Finally, last week, he begins to encourage us to pursue godly wisdom. Considering this, he shows us the reasoning behind it. He tells you to consider it because what it can do for your life. You see, godly wisdom can brighten your face and cheer you up. It helps guide you to a more happy life. And in the Bible, that'd be the word blessed. A happy life. God never intended you to have some sort of miserable life. By the way, even in the midst of all that's going on right now. In fact, today we're going to study godly wisdom as the guide for your life through uncertainty. Because he uses it as proof of godly wisdom providing a happy life amidst any situation. We allow things to get us up and get us down that we shouldn't. And it's interesting because we've put bad guides in our life. So I see this in people. I see people, they come into church life and they either are committed to God because it's really not about what I get out of church. It's what he has given us through his church. And I see people come in for 100 different reasons. And the only reason you should be here is because of what he wants you to do here. It's his commitment to his body, to his people. And what's fascinating is godly wisdom guides you through uncertainty, and so you have to listen to this. You won't have a class on it. You won't go to Yale and learn this. You won't go to Stanford and hear it. Why? Because the institutions have formed education outside and without God. And of course, Solomon, he'd speak right at that. He'd be totally upset at that. He'd say that's meaningless. It's hevel. It doesn't mean it doesn't have any value. It means it's not lasting. It's not lasting value. You can have $1 million in your account, but man, you're still not getting it. I've met the cool thing about being a pastor is I meet all kinds of people. And I have met people poor. I have met people rich, filthy poor, and everything in the middle. And I will tell you, your happiness is not governed by your pocketbook. And if that's your pursuit, and I'm just telling you right now that you will not enjoy life. You really won't, not the way it should be. So when he gets to this part, he starts talking about the reasoning of how can you have a happy life in the middle of uncertainty? How can you have a happy life in the middle of all the stuff we've gone through in the last 2-3 years? I learned a lot about our faith and my own faith by what we went through. I love it. I don't like what we went through, but I love it. It has tested with the fire itself people's real values. Did you notice that? So Solomon in chapter 8, verse 16, I'm not going to read the whole section. I'm going to read chunk at a time because this is this is something where I want to explain it piecemeal as we go through. You could read it at another date on its own. I'm going to use New Living Translation because I just found it a little more digestible for this section. And it's still consistent with the Hebrew. So in Hebrews 8:16, he says this, "In my search for wisdom and in my observation of people's burdens here on earth, I discovered there is a ceaseless activity day and night. I realized no one can discover everything God is doing under the sun. Not even the wisest people discover everything, no matter what they claim." And of course, certainly there are those who claim to know everything. He gives us a very simple introductory principle to life and its uncertainties. With or without God, no human being can fully discover what God is doing. Nobody. He spoke about this earlier in Ecclesiastes 3:11. He said, God's made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity. Get this one. Think about this. He set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I love this. C.S. Lewis drilled into this a little bit. This concept that you could look out into the galaxies and the stars at night and think of things like eternity, endless, those kind of words. No dog does that. No horse looks at Pluto and says, brilliant. He set in our hearts the God concept of eternity. And yet he also, in a juxtaposition, put the concept that you will not be able to fully fathom it. What I love about this is it teaches us an incredible principle. Dealing with uncertain times will require you to trust in something. Because the second you say, oh, I know what's going to happen next week. Really? If I want to destroy that thought in your life, I'll tell you this. You get a day calendar, a planner, and you plan out every hour, even just the working hours. I'll give you grace. Even just the working hours for one whole week, and you stick with your planner. You tell me how good you do at being God through the week. And the truth is, could any of us in this room have thought of what was going to happen over the last 3 years ago? Would you have had any clue what was about to hit? In fact, if you knew what was going to hit, what would you do? You know? I don't know what I'd do. So in some ways, to be quite honest with you, we should be very, very thankful we are not like God in that way. You see, dealing with uncertain times requires faith. How's your faith? What have you trusted in? You know, dealing with life in general, whether you have a crisis or not, also requires faith. When you can't comprehend what's going to happen, when you are confronted with the human condition that you're not in control, you were meant by God, designed by God, to trust in something bigger than yourself. What is it you're trusting in? See? And sometimes we use excuses. Sometimes those excuses sound very, very, very good. But what I have counseled and seen in people when they come into the office and they've had such a mess of life, including in churches, and there are some times where I'll say this, and some of you have heard me say this, where I'll ask somebody, they'll share their church experience, and I'll go, wow, that was messed up. And I'll ask them, why are you even coming here? Or they'll be so broken. And I'll say, why are you even here? And the same message shoots out loud and clear no matter who they are. It's said probably a dozen different ways. It's the same thing. We realize God is bigger than that. Whatever that is. The point is, our faith in Jesus helps us trust God with the future. We cannot discover it. Just get out of your head. You can't discover the future. Our faith is very rational. People don't talk like they're trying to control the future, but they act like it and live like it without God. Right? Because all they have is this. But they're not rational because the reality is you don't even have this. You can't control it. I loved when it comes to using our faith in God and the faith in Jesus to guide our lives to a happier place, which is so cool, is it reminded me of like the sextant. You remember the old, when they'd have to discover places by ship, and they had these maps, and they always had these old cool maps, and some of them are worth a lot of money right now. And the map always had a spot on it that was sort of blank, because it was what was called undiscovered. Undiscovered. Anybody who's taken a journey of discovery realizes there's someplace undiscovered. Life is that way, right? If I'm given 10 more years, if I'm given 20 more years, if I'm given 40 more years, if I'm given a week, there is a part of my future that is the undiscovered territory. And they used to use these things called sextants. And what was cool about this that makes a great illustration of our faith is that they would use a point on the earth, and then they'd use points in heaven to really figure out where they're at. But they would look at the stars as fixed points in heaven. You know, our faith is very similar to this. God is a fixed point in a Christian's life to which we guide our lives. But man, if you're not looking at it, and you're in this ship, and you just say, hey, let's just go that way, odds are you'll be lost in a short amount of time. As a father, you want to guide your children into grace and truth and forgiveness and love? Well, then what is it that's guiding you? You see, I find parents let other people guide their children way too often. I want my kids to learn healthy, stay healthy, so I'll let sports guide their heart. I want my kids to be smart and have good careers, so I'll let academics drive my children's heart. I want them to have good relationships, so I'll sort of like go places where I can manipulate relationships to be with cool kids. I don't know what the deal is sometimes, comparing, all sorts of comparison, you know. And I sit there and I go, none of that is godly wisdom. That's all worldly wisdom. All of that is worldly wisdom. All of it. If God is a fixed point in your life, there are certain things you don't even have to ask. Because if you're lost, guess what you'll say? Pick up the sextant, navigate with God, and figure out where you're at. Most Christians don't know how to do that. And that's what Solomon was getting at. He's saying, you know, you have this fixed point in your faith. With or without God, you can't discover the future, but Jesus, through God, he knows the future. And Solomon said, I saw all the stuff God had done. There are things that you can't comprehend in life. That's okay. There are observations you can't figure out in life. That's okay. Why? Because you weren't meant to. And even if you knew, it would make you no more meaningful as a person. Our value of why we are so loved by God is God himself chose to love us. Hebrews 11:6 puts it this way. Without faith, without trust, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, A, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. If you seriously, truly want to know him, this is the right church. If you want to learn to believe in him, it's the right place. You must. Because it's interesting. You can have a child as a father on Father's Day. You can have a child and you tell them to do something and they can do it. And what's interesting is you think, oh, they're obedient. But you can also find out later they tried to do it on their own and they got themselves in a mess. And they never went back to ask a question because they were too prideful and they wanted to do it themselves. Does that sound familiar? It's almost like God's up there saying, I want you to make plans. I want you to enjoy life. But I want you to remember I'm here for you. The greatest pleasure in life is him walking down life's journey with you, no matter where we're at. That principle of discovery is so important if it's with Jesus. Without God's revelation, humans do not know what will come after them. Nobody. Anybody that tells you is lying to you. It's really cool right now because I feel like in culture, everybody's in the same place in this boat, which is really cool. You know what it is? Utter confusion. Like, I don't know if you watch financial plans or whatever. They're like all over the place trying to figure out the future, you know? and I kind of like that. Why? Because it's like, honestly, we don't know. Take your best stab at it. It's honest. But then Solomon, notice what he says next. On top of this, notice what he says. This too, this idea of not knowing the future and God's future, this too, I carefully explored this concept. I love this, that he just didn't take it for granted, like, I don't know the future. What does that mean in life? Even though the actions of godly and wise people are in God's hands, no one really knows whether God will show them favor. Haven't we all known good people that run on hard times? The same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, all human beings, whether they're righteous, wicked, good, bad, ceremonial, clean or unclean, religious or irreligious. Good people receive the same treatment as sinners. This is without God. And the people who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. It seems so wrong that everyone under the sun suffers the same fate. Can you guess what he's talking about? Without God, if you don't have God, you're in this boat of whether you want to be a good person, bad person, wicked, righteous, does it really matter? We all die. A good person goes through hard times, a wicked person lives a long time. Why? What? It doesn't make sense. It's so wrong. Haven't we all felt that way sometimes? Let's be honest. A good person taken too soon, a bad person living way too long. You see, in uncertain times, life and death have to be dealt with. That's what I like about it. That's why we should take advantage of this moment to say, have you dealt with real life questions today? Life can seem unfair, can't it? But tell me, where does it say life is fair? In fact, as Christians, what's cool about being a Christian is we try to make life fair. We actually want people to share well, all this stuff. We actually try to make life fair. That's our job. But in the reality, in the scheme of life, as Solomon's looking at it, he sits there and goes, our inadequacies cause us to fear the future. All human beings share this in common until Jesus. Jesus is the wisdom of God that sets us free from the fear of death. Do you know that? Let me read it out of Hebrews. Listen to this. Jesus, who died and rose again. Listen to what Hebrews says. Because God's children are human beings, made of flesh and blood, the Son, Jesus, also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die. Only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who had the power of death. Only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. He set us free from dying so that we could love one another. Think about it. And I think COVID is a good illustration of this. You know why? Because COVID brought a whole lot of death and sadness and grief. And people were very, very fearful. Did you not see people fearful during COVID? Because they had not dealt with life. Now, certainly we should be safe, all this stuff. I get it, guys. I totally agree with it too. But the problem I have is some people were fearful. scared to death. You've heard that term? Hebrews is brilliant because Hebrews basically said, Jesus came as a human being for a reason, so that you would not be fearful of life, nor death, nor height. Remember the verses? Nothing. Why? Because of the great love of God for you. And yet I found as true in the church, as true as in the culture, many people were just so fearful. The point is, Jesus came to help us. We need helpers. I need a helper. Do you need help? If you're not in a situation where you sit there and go, I need help, well, then you won't, try to live life on your own, do your thing. But I feel like I need help every day. Every day of my life I need help. And I know somebody who loves me enough to help me. He moves on. Solomon goes on to say this, and notice how he words it. Already, twisted by evil, people choose their own mad course. And trust me, some of these courses have been really mad, by the way. For they have no what? If you're living life without God, right? You're gonna want to make some plan, and all of a sudden you got all these wacky ideas. We call them extremists. Solomon had a better way of looking at them. He said they're twisted by evil and they choose their own mad course because they have no hope. There's nothing ahead but death anyway. There is hope only for what? Living, as they say. I like this old saying. It's really weird. We've lost it. It's one of these, talk to the hand. It's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. The living, at least they know they will die, but the dead know nothing. Listen, without God, the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, nor are they remembered. Whatever they did in their lifetime, loving, hating, envying, is all long gone. They no longer play a part in anything here on the earth. What a thought. Nobody likes to think these thoughts. That's why when I was going through this, I was like, why are you doing this, Solomon? But he's being reasonable. If you don't control the future and you are susceptible to the same fate as every other human being on this planet, actually every human being on this planet, you have to make some decisions on how you're going to live your life, how you're going to navigate your life, and who's going to guide you. Uncertain times show us where our hope is. If your life was an investment of time, work, and money, then this is what happened in this section. Death settles the account of life, but Jesus gives us a living hope for life. Man, you can almost just take that to the bank. If I could just decide to come to church every week and love Jesus because I could get out of it hope. If hope was the only commodity you left here with, it would be worth every penny you spend. In 1 Peter, he says it this way. Jesus has given us new birth into a living hope. How is it living? Because when I went through the last 2 years, my hope was found in something else. A living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead and into an inheritance that can never perish or spoil or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you. You see, because when I had to go through these 2 years, I wasn't navigating by the point on earth and the worldly wisdom. I navigated by heaven and the hope that Jesus brings. That's the hope you really need, guys. Let me just say, through the whole last 2-3 years, there were times I was definitely shaken, but the truth is, every time I navigated back, there was a fixed point. So notice how he ends this up. He actually has a great new note on this. He says, so go ahead, eat your food with joy, drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Live happily. Some people splash more cologne than others, by the way. Live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life. I hate the word meaningless. You know what I mean by that. All the days that don't have value unless they're given to God. But love that woman that God has given you under the sun. I want to pause a second. That term comes up throughout Ecclesiastes, life under the sun. I like the beach. I got to be honest, this is just a personal sidebar. I really like this phrase Solomon uses. This phrase is cool because we live life under the sun. The wife God gives you is a reward for all your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well. For when you go to the grave, there will be no working or planning or knowledge or wisdom without God. Without God. Whatever you do, do well. And enjoy life with your wife. Enjoy life with your wife. If you're married. If you're not married, enjoy life with God. Because ultimately his church is called his what? Bride. Live life with the wife. I've observed something else, he says. In concluding this section, he said, I observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race. The strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes go hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. Those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. It's all decided by chance or by being in the right place at the right time. Without God, isn't that really what it's all about? People can never predict when hard times might come. So like fish in a net or birds in a trap, people are caught by sudden tragedy, surprised by sudden tragedy. You see, without God, life is uncertain. But with him, guys, through Jesus, even our uncertainties and our difficulties are given purpose. And more than purpose, deep set meaning, lasting value. Sometimes I think we miss that somewhere. If you want to guide your life through grace and follow Jesus, you will find value in anything in life because God gives things value. In James 1, 2 through 5, if you listen to how he words this, you realize all of a sudden, difficulties aren't a bad thing to Christians. Somehow we were taught to avoid pain. Maybe we took too many pills. Maybe we were told too many times it's wrong to have that affirmity. There's something wrong with you. There's something not right. Maybe we don't understand that difficulties are a part of life, and somehow our parents tried to raise us so we'd never encounter struggle, which is unrational and unrealistic, and yet conflict avoidance is half the world, and the other half likes to attack. Notice what James says about all this. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it, get this, here's the Christian worldview, the Christian mentality, consider it an opportunity for great joy. I'm telling you, coming out of COVID and everything, we must be the happiest people on earth. All those things consider, I'm like, consider it great joy. And of course, joy doesn't always mean with a smile on the face stuff. But for you know that when your faith is tested, which all of us, I believe, as a church, we were tested the last 2 years, our faith. Your endurance has a chance to grow. Anybody in here felt like they've had to endure more? And have you felt like, I think my endurance has grown. I think I could put up with more now than I used to. I hope so. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, get this, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God. He'll give it to you. He won't rebuke you for asking. Wow. The point is, folks, Jesus brings meaning and purpose to life. He brings actual, lasting, eternal, heavenly meaning to life. Without God, you will wrestle, and you will struggle, and you will have difficulty, and you will have nowhere to go. And that is not what we're here today about. If you have Jesus, I encourage you to grow, to persevere. We are all probably in this room persevering through something right now. And my encouragement to you as a pastor is grow so that you can be complete, perfect. The end game to that is lacking nothing. If you don't know Jesus and you feel like you've been living life without God, and maybe you use him for some sort of once a year or whatever, I encourage you to come to Jesus. Come to Jesus and put your faith in him. Take the first step of salvation. And when he says salvation, folks, he means it. Salvation from a hopeless life. Salvation from a life without direction. Salvation from the difficulties of life. He gives you a new way to navigate life. You're not going to find it other places. Turn to Christ. If that's where you're at and you're like, I want to navigate my life with Jesus and I need to grow, then let us know on your desk. You could QR code it. You could connect with us in one way or another. Talk to somebody afterwards. We have the gospel here that is the gospel of salvation. You won't go pick it up at Rayleigh's afterwards. I love Jesus because he's the very meaning of my life. And he's navigated me through death itself. And the closer I've come to death, which is a lot in my life, I feel, many times, the closer I see heaven. And I will tell you this, you add up all the hard times you may have gone through and may go through, and they are nothing compared to the joys of heaven. We will look back on these moments of perfection and say thank you. And I pray that you thank him today. It's exciting. Folks, don't get lost in this world. There's a way to get found, but you have to navigate life with God. Let's pray. God, thank you so much in your grace. You realized that you needed to come to earth physically as a human being. You needed to show us what it meant to live life for you. And it wasn't without pain or void of difficulty. It was in it and through it and the power to overcome it. And I just want to encourage every person here. If they feel hopeless, there is hope. I want to encourage every person here that you can get through these months and years, whatever God brings. But please, I pray, help us to navigate with you, Father. Your grace is sufficient from the very beginning to the very end and for eternity. In your name, amen.